Although there are tons of videos and articles on large-scale changes that we've seen happening around us, most Reddit threads and YouTube channels try to stay away from the changes that can't be backed by more than one person. This leaves out thousands of important experiences that more or less have been thrown to the wayside, and this makes a lot of sense. In a community focused on a phenomenon that just doesn't seem to make much sense, because we all know deep down it obviously has to make sense, we just don't get it yet. We don't want to dirty the waters with fluff. And it is important. It helps us save face in front of a world that's already full of suspicion. But this leaves out a lot of amazing stories trustworthy people out there are experiencing, and these stories are just as important as those that have been approved for Mandela scrutinization. By ignoring the existence of these experiences, then we ignore possible evidence. It makes sense to look at these stories if any real sorts of conclusions are to ever be drawn. Of course, we have to take into consideration that a single person's story is just that. But maybe by looking at these personal shifts for people, we'll find commonalities in the effect that we're otherwise missing, which in my opinion, gets us one step closer to where we want to be. Awake. I have had changes happen personally. I want to open the door to folks out there that want to share their stories but have not found the correct forum to do that in. Come forward and be heard. So, I'll start. The following list contains 2 stories that are of my own account. I will then go on to share 2 stories by other Mandela effect sufferers who have been brave enough to submit their events. Number 1. 4 weeks ago, I stopped into Safeway with another mom to grab dinner after school. This friend was in no way aware of the effect. Upon going into the store, we walked directly to the freezer section. We discussed what the kids would like in detail, and I placed 1 Stouffer's lasagna and 1 Stouffer's mac and cheese in the empty hand basket that I was carrying. My friend observed this. I turned and walked about 3 to 4 feet to the self-checkout line. When I reached the scanner, I reached down to pull 2 items out of the basket, but one had literally disappeared into thin air. I was beyond startled. And I stood there. I had to leave the line to get another package, and I retraced my steps back and forth 3 times. No answer came to me. My friend was just as shocked. She just kept saying, "But I saw you put it in there." And suddenly she jumped, saying somebody had pushed her from behind. Number 2. Our area had been hit hard by snow and windstorms, which we were not used to where I live. The storms knocked out tons of trees, and our personal backyard was a landmine of debris. On Saturday, we had friends over, and I was doing hair color for one. We were standing in the window of the kitchen, and for 6 hours I stood staring at that debris and watching the light snow falling. We even discussed the yard with my guests. Sunday morning, I wake up and head to the kitchen. Looking out the back window, the yard is in perfect order. The wood had all been stacked neatly and the yard raked and the snow toys put away. I turned to my husband on the couch and started. "Whoa, thank you for getting up so early. I didn't even notice that you were outside." He looks at me oddly and he replies, "It's been that way since Thursday." Number 3. I'd like to share YouTuber Guy Fawkes' account of his own personal Mandela effect told by him.
I've got Joel with me, by the way. Say hey, Joel.
Hello, people.
So Joel was with me on this. And Joel came to me and said, we are missing a ton of these things that screw on the top of the lamps. I don't know, somebody stole them or something, right? People do that. So I said, I don't know what that's called, but we went into the boss's office and said, hey, we're looking for this thing that you screw on the top of the lamp to hold the shade tight. He said, a fennel. I said, a what? He said, a fennel. You never heard of a fennel? I said, I've never heard of a fennel. I don't know where to get it. He said, I'm sure you can get it from HD Supply. So we went into HD Supply Solutions, went into their website. I'm looking at his computer, looking over his shoulder. He's typing it in, fennel. Called it up there. Well, sure enough, I need those. So I'm like, okay, I've got to go back to my desk and order these. So let me make sure I see how that's spelled. It's a fennel. Well, I didn't order it that day, but we talked about it at least 20 times. Even at our end of the day meeting, we said, you learned something new today, didn't you? I said, sure did. What'd you learn? I learned about a fennel. So I come back from my weekend break. I go to the computer. I go to HD Supply. I type in FENNAL. Now I'm frustrated, right? I type into Google, what is that thing called that you screw in the top of your lampshade, and it tells me a finial. I was blown away. It's not even close to the spelling that I knew it was, because I was thinking fennel kennel. Finial, F-I-N-I-A-L is what it's called now. And that's literally 2 days ago. And I was so shocked, I called Joel. Am I saying it exactly the way it happened?
Exactly. I was right there. We typed in FENNAL, and come Sunday, It's spelled totally different.
That blew my mind. I said, here's another example. This is like the fifth one for me.
Number 4. The following story was submitted by one of our email support group members. The following is his unedited account. Hello there, my name is John, and I'm a 42-year-old, and I need to share my Mandela story. My story is one of pain and enlightenment. I want to share because there might be people going through the things that I went through, and if anything, this story can show them that they're not alone, and that there is help. So let me begin, and I'll try not to be that long. Where to begin? I was a deep family man. I'd lived with my mom and dad and brother. My brother was handicapped and had mental retardation, so I decided to put my life on hold so that he could have the best life possible with his family. Yes, I worked and I did things, but it was a nice family unit and it made him smile. My parents were in their 60s, but we all lived together in harmony. In 2006, my mom broke her leg, and I started taking care of her and my brother Matthew. Anyway, she couldn't walk, and so me and my friends would all watch movies together with my mom, and she started seeing things, and it made us all think. This is like 2007, and she would see things like the Scarecrow having a gun in Wizard of Oz, and she'd see logos that were changed. She would always say that the reason why we never went back to the moon is just because we had found something, and it told us not to come back there. She remembered people dying, and they were alive, including Mandela, who to this day I still can hear say, John, didn't we just see his funeral when he died in prison? There's so much I can list. The stars looked wrong to her, things didn't taste right, the sun looked wrong, and so on. We would agree with her, but we just put it in the back of our minds. And now that's the backstory. And so, here's mine. In 2012, my life was destroyed, and I think it had to do with the effect. In December of that year, 2 of my good friends died, and my girlfriend of 4 years just out of nowhere dumped me for no reason. I understand it happens to everybody, right? The year goes by, and on December 17th, 2013, my dad dies. I try to keep my family together. My mom tells me that she's there for me and Matthew, and then she got sick. Doctors didn't know the cause, and on December 31st, 2014, she died. I told my brother, who in his 39 years of being healthy, never going to the hospital or anything, ends up dying the next December 26, 2015. My brother was handicapped and loved life, and boom, he passes. Now I know they say that loved ones go 'cause their mates die, but this was not the case. My mom was a fighter, and Matthew's mind didn't understand death. I was destroyed, and I got to my knees and I asked God why. I asked him to show me truth, and the next day there was a message on my phone about Mandela effect, and I started researching. I think that when the anatomy changed, their bodies just couldn't handle it. I think it killed them. It's hard trying to find answers. I've been watching Mandela videos, and I remember, like my mom did, Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, Febreze, and so on. After all this 2 months ago, I became a reborn Christian. I seek answers now, and things are becoming weird for me. Everything seems wrong. This whole existence feels wrong. I have strange dreams, like mentioned in your videos, but mine don't seem like dreams. Every morning, I can remember it as vivid as it happened to the detail. I have the ear ringing, especially during the hour of 1 to 3 a.m. I also experience extreme deja vu. In my mind's eye, I see 2 different paths at times, and it's scary. I know this sounds crazy, but if by telling my story I can help more people out there, then I'm all for it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I am all alone now, but there's always hope for a brighter tomorrow. Yours, John Boy. G. I'm 50 years of age, a chartered accountant, a former member of Mensa with a measured IQ of 156, and I run my own business. Although I haven't worked for the past 10 months due to extreme fatigue, which my doctors can't find any cause for, and they insist that I must be depressed. I'm not depressed, but rather feel it's their fallback position, as blood tests are coming up negative and they can't diagnose anything else to give me a pill for. I was diagnosed in 2006 with an adenoma and shortly after iron overload, both of which were well advanced but thankfully are now under control. At a young age, I have experienced a number of strange paranormal experiences, the most vivid being my brother and I witnessing a ghost dog entering our shared bedroom and turning around, laying down, getting up, and disappearing through the neighboring wall. There have been other incidents growing up which has me convinced that there are realms beyond. Thanks and regards, G. Story 2, J. Seems like tragedy and or loss after finding out about the quantum effect should be added to our list of similarities. Within a week of investigating the effect, my car, which had given me no problems before, suddenly hit the transmission and went completely out. No warning, nothing. Not to mention all the relationships and friends that I have lost. Why does this have to hurt so bad? Is it our faults that we're here and we hear? Have we all died and this is our afterlife? Or are we like that movie, The Others, and we're somehow haunting the people in this reality while we ourselves are being haunted? With love and solidarity, J. Story 3. T. I first noticed something very wrong in 2014. At a holiday gathering, I was talking to my younger brother and I said, "Remember when we were growing up? You never called me by my name. You always called me sister, and Dad always called me sis, or sister. I know we're country." Laugh out loud. Anyway, he looked at me strangely and he said, "No, I don't remember." I mean, he called me sister until I was like 13 or so. There's no way, in my opinion, that he could forget this. I was really sad and really depressed. I started trying to understand what was happening. Did I die? Am I crazy? What in the world? I have so many things to say, but I'm going to stop here. T. Story 4. A. I initially didn't know what to write about because there were so many experiences that have happened to me, but this particular experience keeps happening. Over the years, I would have problems with alarm clocks. They would work fine one minute and then out of the blue quit functioning. I never even thought of that until recently when it started happening again. And what happens is the clock works, but the alarm doesn't. This has happened numerous times over the years. I mention this because recently I got an old-fashioned alarm clock and I turned it on because I was going to work for a while on the weekend and I happened to wake up before the alarm would have gone off, and the alarm was turned off. When this started a few weeks ago, I started to use my phone's alarm function. I have it set to just Monday through Fridays, and what's interesting about this is even though it's just set Monday through Friday, it still goes off every day. I do live with family. I take care of my sister. We are a close-knit family, but nobody does anything to my alarm clock. Similar experiences have been happening to me at work. I have a fan at work, and when I leave, I turn it off. Numerous times I come in, and the fan is back on. Nobody uses this except for me, and I look at it again before I leave each night to make sure it's off. I just wanted to get this off my chest and hope it helps. A. Story 5. A. I will gladly tell you about my journey. I know there are possibly parts that may seem personal, especially because I have to outline my worst moments in order to do so. I'd like to start very early. I was a very sensitive child. I could never deal with aggressive behavior, and even people who talked in normal voices often seemed way too loud for me. I always felt very different and kind of out of place. It wasn't until my early youth that a lot of it changed in a negative way. A bunch of things appeared that I wasn't able to deal with. I couldn't cope with the fact that my parents gave me up anymore. I started to notice all the evil in the world and how people decided to treat each other, and I could not understand it. I grew up in a traditional Christian household, and I started to become very aggressive towards all religious approaches in that time as well because, well, I could not imagine how a loving God would let so much suffering happen. I started to develop an outright hatred towards God and everybody who was stupid enough to adhere to any systems which venerated this being, and I cursed him many times. As the years progressed, my path towards feeling unworthy of love and my hatred intensified. Because my worldview was so negative, I withdrew more and more from people. No one seemed too willing to listen to my radical ideas of change that were needed in the world, and I hated them for that too. I got to know my wife about 18 years ago, when I was 20. She always had my back, and she took care of me. Well, my condition turned into a social phobia, and from there, to depression. For many years, I could not even go out to the supermarket. I wished for death every day. All this just progressed in a downward spiral. Well, I spent much of my time smoking weed and playing video games for the benefit of ignoring as much of the world as I could until I was about 33. Then I reached a point where I could not even take that secluded life anymore, and I found a drug that I stumbled upon, which I used to totally turn off and at that same time give me a feeling of mental strength and self-worth that I hadn't known before. This led to the loss of my sensitive character to make way for something darker. I started selling drugs. I left my wife for another woman who was much more in tune with that drug lifestyle. I was on the drug for about a year when it became clear that I was not going to survive this. My body started to shut down. Now, of this part, I'm not really proud, but it is what happened, and I want to tell you the truth. I would purposely take that stuff before getting into the car because I simply just didn't care. I was at the very bottom of human conditions. One day, I took a very high dose and I got in my car. I fell asleep at the wheel. I drifted off the road and was already on the way into the tree line when suddenly it felt like somebody was touching me on the shoulder. I woke up and instinctively managed to avoid hitting the tree line. I have to emphasize to you, you do not simply wake up under the influence of this drug. It's what people put in drinks to abuse others. There's just no simple waking up to it. I went to my house, to my wife, and she took me in once again and took care of me. I stopped using and I got through it in 4 days. This was in 2013. From there, very quickly, many changes happened that I just couldn't explain. My depression, my fear, my hate, it just vanished. Over the course of a year and a half, I mean, really vanished. Like there's not a trace of those negative things left in me. I knew something had saved me, that I should have died in that car. Also in the time, I started having lucid and guiding dreams, which I had never had before. The changes in me were radical. I stopped eating meat, I stopped smoking weed, playing video games, and learned to love my life and appreciate what it is. I've often exclaimed how I feel like I'm somehow a totally different person now, and I mean that, literally, simply somebody else. Or maybe more like the person I was supposed to be if I hadn't let fear and hate overwhelm me. Now, I basically just want to live and live as simple as possible, with focus on my learning and helping others wherever I can. I work part-time now, and other than that, I mainly read and meditate, and I am very happy. Another weird change is this. I now have a lot of pain in my left shoulder and have problems with my back. I also get a very strong itching in my hands and feet every 2 weeks or a few days. And then there's ringing in my ears, which is also new to me, but it doesn't really bother me. I actually like somehow how it sounds, and I just listen to it. I only learned about the Mandela effect in the middle of last year. I do not know if there's a connection to my growth, but I feel that there could be. There are many boy who cries wolf instances these days, and there's a whole bunch of things that I simply know something is wrong with. One of the strongest ones for me is the Volvo logo. I know what the logo looked like. I've also drove a Ford and have the same relation to that change. There are many changes for me. Keep in mind that I am not American, so although I view my series and movies in English, I have no relationship to a lot of the things that might have changed in America. All in all, I just want to say that I'm sure of these changes, but I'm not worried about it at all. I now have absolute faith and that everything is going to be fine. Apart from a few months when I found out about the effect, I do not make it a priority in my life anymore. I would really like to understand it, but I feel that my focus should be on my inner path. I've experienced consciousness functioning apart from the body, and I know that nothing can really happen to any of us. Love from Germany, A. Story 6, A.T. I first noticed Coca-Cola in the Ford logo. My wife worked at an embroidery shop, and she did the Ford logo. I asked her when and why they'd changed it, and she said it was always like that, with the pigtail. We owned 4 Fords, and none of them ever had a pigtail. The big one for me in my reality was the narwhals with the 9-foot unicorn spikes. They never actually existed in my reality. I'm also getting a lot of synchronistic events. Every time I open the Bible, the word watchman catches my eye. Thanks, A.T. Story 7, W. I've been so confused about the world. It feels so different to me now. Almost like people have a brain virus. They're acting so crazy. It's also very lonely. Being a very logical and critical thinking person, at first I thought maybe I was doing what everyone who doesn't believe in ME explains to us we're doing, misremembering. As you can tell, I don't get much support over my ME confusion. There are no people in my life to whom I can talk to about it. I love watching videos because it makes me feel less alone. I saw you were collecting people's experiences, so here are a few things that I have noticed. The first remembrance I have of a possible ME was back in 2004. I was at a professional football game and for the first time heard the term 3 and out, meaning 3 plays without a first down, leading to a punt on the 4th down. I've been watching football my whole life, and I had never, ever heard that term until that day. I asked the friends that I was with about it, and they said that it's been around forever. Obviously, ME wasn't a thing then, but it made such an impression on me I never forgot it. I clearly remember my husband telling me something years ago. He was in the Navy before I met him and had a few experiences that he shared with me. Just today, he denied ever telling me those things. In fact, he claims that they never happened in this reality, so why would he have ever told them to me? I about lost my mind. I thought he was joking. He laughed and he asked me if I thought it was another ME. I have paranormal things happening to me. I have felt perception about people. It's uncanny. Also, I've had things move in front of me, premonitions of actions I should have taken, random thoughts that fit with things that have happened seconds later, and things that others around me are thinking at the same time. I've smelled my grandmother's perfume. She was my best friend and has been gone for 10 years. And I feel her presence when I'm alone. This perception has come and gone over the years, but has picked up since I started researching ME. I feel like I'm a very different person than I used to be. I have confidence and willpower, and it's increased dramatically. My perceptions have increased. My medical things have happened, and they're odd and different. But I feel better even just reaching out to somebody who seems accessible. Thank you for understanding. W. Story 8. WS. I'm wondering why nobody's posting about their own personal objects changing, disappearing, and reappearing. Just little changes, but too big to be ignored or brushed off. Last spring, I bought 4 pastel-colored tiki glasses from Dollar Tree. All the same size, all the same shape, just different colors. Wife and I use them daily, and we spent a lot of time outside, and we loved these glasses. Alas, my wife managed to break one. So the next time I was at the dollar store, I was pleased to find the exact replacement, and we continued to use them daily, sitting them on the kitchen windowsill because they were just so cool looking. Jump ahead a few months. Wife comes back from a trip, and we're relaxing in the kitchen. She points over to one of the glasses sitting on the counter, and she asks, "Where did you get that?" The glass was the same color, but its size, its shape, had shifted. It was taller than the other glasses, and now was much wider on top, with a much smaller base, and felt awkward in my hand. There is absolutely no way that this was the same glass we had been using every day for months. This happened in October 2016. I took the liberty of enclosing a pic of the said glasses. WS. Story 9. S. I've been experiencing ME for a long time, dating back to my younger years when I would notice a drastic deviation in my rib cage's overall shape or skull shape, usually coupled with headaches or other physical pains. I would often become panicked and very confused, but sadly would be met with a response of these things always being part of our physiology, which further pushed me towards the idea that I may be losing my mind in some way. I was always very fascinated with ancient Egyptian culture and various things of that nature growing up, and into my adult years I maintained that interest. I had kept one book in particular that was a children's book about Egypt. It had a big fake gem in the center of the cover and documented things involving details such as why the pharaohs had different shaped crowns with relevance to what they ruled over, things like that. This book was large, roughly 12 inches and sizable in my now adult hands. Believe me when I say I know what the original size of the book was, but literally the next day, when reaching for the very same book I saw barely a day prior, I noticed that its size had become barely larger than a small Reader's Digest magazine. I remember staring at it in shock for a long time and experiencing extreme confusion. I walked around the house holding this book, mentioning to my family that it had shrunk and this couldn't be possible. However, much like noticing my physiological changes, I was told that the book in question was always quite small. The odd thing is that all of this hit ahead and I started feeling overwhelmingly off about most of my waking life, like I had woken up in some kind of alternate reality. This all and much more happened sequentially and gained severity in 1998, 2002, 2012, and 2016. Now I find myself feeling ever more confused as to why this world is not recognizable to me, and it's getting more so as time passes. I would like to meet others who deal with this because I am getting so tired of feeling so alone, of feeling like I'm going insane. Thank you, S. Story 1, L. I'd like to share a few of what I believe are ME-related experiences. Between 15 to 20 years ago, my sister gave me a book that she had just read called Mexican Time, about an American couple who moves to a town in Mexico. Years went by and at some point I mentioned the book to her, but she had absolutely no recollection of it. What is odder still is I have moved into that town.
I remember my mom and I having identical birthmarks on our feet, but at some point I realized that this was no longer the case. She has no memory now of that birthmark. When I was a teenager, my sister worked at Boeing. She told me that at work there was a book on display about UFOs, a disclosure-oriented book. She also told me that shortly after seeing this book, it disappeared. Years later, I brought the story up and she now has no memory of it. Soon after the book display, she met and married a nuclear physicist who worked on the Star Wars defense program. At one point, she fell asleep again. It was just too much for her. Now my views on conspiracies, vaccines, Trump, etc. are a source of conflict between us, so I do not plan on mentioning ME to her. The other night, I was looking for ME references in Spanish and I was taking notes. At one point, when I looked at the notes, I saw that the last note I had written had physically disappeared off the page. I have had a brush with death, and it feels like it might be related. About 13 years ago, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which is often fatal. I remember feeling that I should tell the universe what I wanted, and so I did. I sent out a message that I either wanted to go quickly or that I did not want to have cancer at all. I knew the second was irrational and it wasn't really an option, but I put it out there anyway. Mainly, I just knew that I didn't want to go through chemo and radiation. After a complete hysterectomy and a week or two of recovery time, I got a call from the surgeon's nurse who asked me if I was sitting down. She told me that the board had met and they'd looked at my lab reports. She said I had never had cancer in the first place. I thought to myself, what was the point of all that? And then I figured it out. I was a classroom teacher at the time, and I had made it known to my students that I had no fear of death. I think this was a test. I believe that not fearing death is very key to spiritual growth, and also being able to speak one's truth and live in an authentic way. I also believe that we build exit points into our lives. When we plan our lives, well, in between lives. I think this could have been one of those exit points. I hope that was not too much. L. Story 2. W.
Here's my most recent and strongest yet ME. Basically, a white plastic box appeared in my yard about a month ago. It is very sturdy and has been in the soil for many years, as the ground is completely undisturbed. It measures about 2.5 to 3 square inches and says Charlotte in its embossing on the top. I have no idea how deep it goes in the ground. Research on Charlotte manufacturing returned no results. We purchased our home in 2012 and I do all the yard work myself. Living on the Gulf of Mexico, we do yard work almost year-round. I have raked and mowed my lawn about every 1 to 2 weeks for the past 5 years. This white box was never there. I am sure of it. Also of note, this object appeared just a couple of feet from the house. Looking outside of my office man cave, the windows of which I look out many times daily, no way I could have not have seen this before now. W.
Story 3. A.
Let me start off by saying that I found the effect by accident. I didn't hear about it from anyone, but I was having people change around me, one in particular, with no explanation. I'll get to that. Most of the ME I see are trivial things, letters, tenses, a word, things often overlooked or taken as what it looks like, a marketing decision. But I think there's a huge significance behind it. Trivial never really is trivial, is it? When one hand is waving, you gotta look at what the other hand is doing. I haven't told anyone in the ME community this, and no one believes me elsewhere, so I do my own research. In 2012, I began noticing a change in my wife's demeanor. I'd been with her for 10 years, and we were inseparable. We have a couple of kids, basically a pretty regular life. Not hard, but not easy, 'cause what is? In 2012, she changed, attitude and expression, just changed. Not slowly over a long period of time, just out of nowhere. I took the family to Disneyland to the same hotel we honeymooned at in May of 2012. It was a really bad trip. In 2013, she went to stay at her sister's for a few days. After a week, her twin sister told me she'd been meeting guys on this fish app on her phone. She cheated with 3 guys that I now know of. When I found out, I was in a rage. I had never had to worry about this before. It was completely out of character. The last guy, he'd driven 60 miles to pick her up and 60 miles back to his house. They did their thing and brought her back. Shady stuff. I fought for my wife after a breakdown of sorts. I chased this guy into a bathroom where he locked himself inside. Good thing he did. We began couples counseling and I fought for her to come back. She finally wrote me a 3-page long apology and then sat in front of me and told me everything, and that she loved me. We were back and it was an awesome 8 months. I didn't know that her best friend from work had it hard for her for a year, and it got worse once I had her back. Long story short, one day she was with me, the next she was a lesbian. I hadn't had a clue. Not one. I stayed in counseling, but nope, she changed her complete identity, changed her demeanor, and her attitude. She regressed to making monetary mistakes we learned from as a young couple. Now this girl, who is 10 years younger than my now ex-wife, is the boss. My ex is not allowed to have a phone, money, etc. She has told people she wants out, but can't. This isn't her at all, but between 2012 and 2013, something happened. It's like the person I married and knew completely, and this person aren't the same one. Reality shifted, or I don't know anymore. We were best friends. I've been down so many rabbit holes. Everyone thinks I'm crazy if I tell them that this is a completely different version of the person I married. Nobody believes it. But as much as I know Kit Kat had a dash and I drove a Ford with the old logo forever, nothing compares. I knew my wife. After the initial shock and paralysis that Emmy has caused me, it now makes absolute sense to me with the timeline I have. I sure hope you believe me. It's a hard one to swallow. Your friend, A.
Story 4. When watching one of the live streams, you said that your health problems began in 2012, and that really resonated with me because I myself have had a near-death experience in 2012, as well as my stepsister who lives in Texas. She fell ill one night, and it turned into a nightmare for her. She was unconscious in the hospital for over 2 months with a mysterious autoimmune disease that had nothing to do with her blood. The doctors were baffled, and they ended up telling the family to prepare for her death and that there was nothing else they can do. She ended up making a miraculous recovery and is alive and well today, but still has iron overloads that she gets treatment for. During that time, I was pregnant with our 4th child. It was a girl. Suddenly one night during my 36th week of pregnancy, I suffered a complete placenta abruption. I was rushed to the hospital and began hemorrhaging on the way, losing over a liter of blood and also the child I was carrying. Once at the hospital, I was stabilized, and then they told me I was going to have to deliver my daughter normally. They induced me and I was forced to give birth to our deceased daughter. After that, I was given blood transfusions and released from the hospital as they do with normal pregnancies and deliveries. The doctors could provide no explanation to me as why this happened, but I strongly feel that it had to do with our blood types. I am Rh negative carrier and my husband is Rh positive, so I have to receive the shots with each pregnancy and following delivery to ensure the protection of the child that I'm carrying and any subsequent children. After our experiences, my stepsister and I both went on with our own spiritual journeys to try to make sense of what we had both been through. I studied lots of different ideas and beliefs, things like Buddhism, quantum physics, science, and then I finally found my way back to Christianity. I've been studying the Bible ever since. My stepsister and I just recently discovered the Mandela effect, and she and I are remembering a lot of things differently than all the other people in our family do that did not suffer any kind of near-death experience. I've been following the people talking about biblical changes on YouTube, and it's mind-blowing. There's even a pastor talking about them. And when I have brought up changes to Christians, they shut down completely and they won't talk about it. If they say anything at all, it is only that it's not real, and it's always read the way it does now. I also have the same kind of responses about other Emmy effects, having to do with movie lines, logos, books, etc. It's a very lonely feeling, and it really sucks to be labeled crazy just for wanting to discuss the things that you are seeing. So I just wanted to let you know that it's great to hear that there are others speaking out on this matter, for the people that don't have anybody else to talk to in their own world. Much love, A. Story 5, G. One night, I walked outside to feed my animals. As I walked out, my next-door neighbor saw me. For some strange reason, he had this look on his face like he just saw a ghost. He ran inside his house and came back out with a flashlight. He began shining it in my direction. He lives a couple of blocks away, so I thought maybe he was looking at something else. He started yelling to his wife to come outside really quick. He jumped into his pickup truck, spun out towards the driveway, and rode right to my house. It was dark by now, and he shined the headlights in my direction. Then he got out with a flashlight and started coming closer to me. I thought he'd gone crazy, so I ran back in my house. I ran to one of my windows to see what he was doing, but it was that point something really odd happened. When I looked outside, my neighbor's pickup truck was parked nice in his driveway, and he was no longer outside. It looked as if he'd never even left the driveway. There's absolutely no way that he could have left that quickly. I sat back in my chair for about 15 minutes trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Then it hit me. What if this was my neighbor from the old reality, and he was seeing my ghost? G.
Story 1. J. In 1985, I was in the movie Silverado. I was an extra at first, but when they found out that I could ride, they made me a wrangler. To get to the point, I watched the movie about once every 2 years. Last time I watched it in 2016, something wasn't right. The camera angles weren't right, and I don't remember some of the shots that I was in. The last time I saw the movie, I had a lot more FaceTime. I don't think they re-edited the movie in 30 years. There's more to this, but I hit on the main points. J. Story 2. G. I recently ran into a couple of friends of mine who attended high school with me. In the old reality, I owned a vintage car and I drove it to school every day. I owned 3 vintage cars, but I only drove one of them to school. This particular car was a 1949 Chevrolet. It was near mint condition when I bought it, and everybody knew me by that car. Even the teachers complimented me on that car. Everybody loved that car. So anyway, I ran into a couple of friends that I knew from high school. I asked them, well, one of them, if he remembered the old car that I drove to school. He looked at me with a strange look on his face and he said, "No, I didn't know you had an old vintage car." I replied with, "What? You're joking, right?" "No, I honestly don't remember you having a vintage car." I said, "What do you mean you don't remember? I drove it to school, I took you to parties, I took you to work." He replied, "I'm sorry, I just don't remember it. I remember you had a 1980-something convertible." I quickly changed the subject because I didn't want him to feel like I was upset because he couldn't remember my car. I ran into another friend later that I went to school with, and I asked him if he remembered that old vintage 49 Chevrolet I drove to school. He replied, "No, I don't think so." I described the car in great detail, hoping he'd remember, and he still said he didn't remember me ever owning a vintage car in high school. I replied back that I owned 3 of them back then, and he laughed and said, "All I remember is that 80s red convertible you drove." Then he asked another strange question. He asked where my best friend is now. I asked him who he was talking about because I didn't really have a best friend in high school. He said, "You know who I'm talking about." And I said, "Honestly, I don't." "The guy who drove the funeral car to school." I told him that I had never had a friend who drove a funeral car. This was totally not my style. He looked at me with a smile and he said, "You know who I'm talking about. You just don't want to admit he was your friend." I told him I was sorry and that he must have me confused with someone else. He angrily got into his pickup truck and he left. I stood there wondering what the hell had happened. Then I realized I'm no longer in the same reality, and I think I have a different past. And from the sound of it so far, I don't think I want to know what that past was. G. Story 3. K. I'm not happy to say it, but I drive around the city for a living and I currently do not have a license. Because of that fact, I am constantly looking at all of my mirrors for police officers to make sure that I cannot be pulled over. I was recently on a 2-lane road in Florida. I was in the left lane and there was a police officer on the right lane. I ended up passing him while I was driving, and I kept a keen eye on him to make sure he didn't get behind me. I was about 2 or 3 car lengths ahead of him. He was still in the right lane. This road is 3 to 4 miles, a state road with no turnoffs. While I was driving, I kept an eye on him, but my phone rang, so I looked down to see who was calling. I obviously didn't pick it up to answer because I didn't want to give him any reason to pull me over. And in a matter of less than seconds, I looked up and he was gone. He was there. My phone rang. I looked down. I looked up. He was gone. He couldn't have turned off as there was nowhere to make a turn. Even if he pulled over onto the dirt, I would have seen his car sitting there. There was nothing around. I had to pull over because I thought I was going crazy. I'd watched him behind me for a mile, and then he vanished. If it wasn't for the fact that I didn't have a license at the time, I wouldn't have even noticed him. If you have any thoughts on this situation, then I'm open to any interpretation. I hope one day we're all able to figure out exactly what's going on here. K. Story 4. C. I've always believed in the wonders of the universe. As I grew older, I loved music, and I willed to be a success in the music industry. In 1998, at the age of 48, I was on my way. In 2012, my wife started acting very cold, totally different, and now we're divorced. That was the beginning of the oddities for me. Several months later, a member of my band tracked me down and said he felt something was very wrong. I found out that we were a #1 band with 2 hit records. I found articles saying that we had been on the Johnny Carson show. I couldn't understand. I contacted the lead singer and our drummer of our suddenly successful band. But other members have no recollection of recording the songs we did, or ever being in the recording studio at all. And it was MGM recording. The guitar player does remember everything. What scares me is that he does remember being on Johnny Carson. I tried to find our old keyboard player, and one search site said he was 74 years old. Another site said he'd passed away in 2008 at age 66. My singer doesn't have any memory of being in the recording studio at all, although he should be the first to remember, as I guess we left him for lunch while it took him several hours to get the vocals down. I think we may all be on different timelines. C. Story 5, T. It's hard to believe, but my whole body has changed for the better. I actually felt some of the changes happen, which is really terrifying to say the least. After weeks, I sort of accepted the presence of whatever was going on, and I'd lay in my bed waiting for it to come. I used to have a slip disc, which is gone completely. I also have always had very bad teeth, but now they've regenerated and they are in perfect condition. My veneers seem to have somehow fused with my teeth. I was very ashamed of them, and I often wish I had looked after them, but now they're all strong and good. All this sounds unbelievable. I have photo evidence. I have a CD from when I had an MRI scan for my slip disc. I lived with a bad back starting in 2009. It feels now like I have a whole new body. I felt the presence of whatever it is in my body making the changes over a period of 3 months. I do not know what it was, how, or why it happened. For a while I was so upset about losing my old body, I felt very alone. But to be honest, I now have a better body, so I'm actually very grateful in a strange way. I'm strong now. I'm skilled at boxing, which I could never do at all before. I have very minimal body fat, and now I'm toned. Oh, and my hair is growing back, which I love. I documented all of these changes with my smartphone over the week, so I have evidence. I literally watched a scar disappear. You can't make shit like that up. This whole ME has my mind blown. Never mind the fact that I used to have a beer belly and now I have a 6-pack. My changes started happening in October 2016. The changes for me are so positive, I believe this ME is good. I have peace, and it's so strange because I'm really happy, but I have moments where I get scared and think about the Bible changes, etc., and then I think the worst. I am still to meet someone in person who is going through this. I've started to get a bad name from people at work as a conspiracy nut job, so I try to speak about this very little. T. Story 6, T. I'm in the same boat as many folks that watch your videos. So much to the point of seeing somebody else that's not myself in the mirror, even though I know it's still me. My son has social anxiety-related issues that are now extremely rare thanks to the programs he's been involved with. He presently is on the verge of turning 13, and at age 8, he asked for quantum physics textbooks. I gladly got some for him, and a short time after we began discussing time travel. With a straight face and conviction in his eyes, he told me that he would make theory a reality. We had a discussion about the potential hazards of making contact with anybody from the past, and he assured me that he'd leave me breadcrumbs for me to follow if he ever did it. Just to let me know that he'd accomplished his goal, to make me proud in the event that I had been gone after his discovery. Shortly after, I began noticing the ME changes. I'd like to think it's sheer coincidence, but what if that little turd actually pulled it off? What if? T. Story 7, K. When I search, the more and more things have changed. There's been some really intense short-term changes around me physically. Like one day, all the garbage cans outside changed size, shape, and color. I walked past my truck and the steering wheel was on the other side of the truck like it is in England. Around the same time, I also noticed that 40-ounce bottles at the convenience store had changed from glass to plastic. The same day later on, the garbage cans and steering wheel both changed back. I've also seen buildings around my hometown that used to be in different places. There's this house that's really old and abandoned, and it's falling apart. It's surrounded by blackberry bushes. I saw this house had been torn down, and they were starting to build a foundation for a new one. Now, the old house is back, like it's never been torn down at all.
I have a kitty. This kitty is my pride and joy, and he's always with me. He sat by the door and said goodbye to us as we drove off to school this morning. At 1 p.m. today, after receiving that email from YouTube and talking online openly about the quantum changes and YouTube's intent to make less desirable info impossible to find, I returned home to find my cat missing. There are 4 of us, 2 kids, 2 adults. Half our house was at school. We 2 adults looked for him everywhere. At 2 p.m., we finally found him. He was inside a steamer trunk, inside our closet, with a heap of things sitting on top of the lid. Everything was in place where it usually was. We have no idea how he got in there. We had been home all day, and if we hadn't found him, he most definitely would have died. It was by chance I even lifted that lid when I heard the faintest weak little mew. My husband and I were very shook. Kitty is safe now, but the experience was oddly timed, and it shook me quite a bit. This cat is very special to me and is definitely my weakness. We have 3 cats. That it was this one was oddly specific. I have never felt like a targeted individual, and I don't know if I believe many targeted individuals' stories, but this experience shook me enough that I almost did not put up this video. Story 1, JW. So I was just listening to a personal story video on your YouTube channel, and I didn't even finish because I got to story 5 on the video and I had to stop and email you. I have been experiencing the body changes, and I don't think it's finished yet. Let me explain. I've had really bad tonsils my whole life, constantly inflamed and infected, and I've had constant stones in them for years. Suddenly, they're gone. I had a surgery scheduled and everything for last November. I canceled it after years of causing me problems. They got better overnight. I noticed all of a sudden that I could drink. I used to get hammered after 2 drinks, but suddenly I can binge, not eat anything, no water, and get up early with no consequences. I also used to struggle with addiction. I've gotten no help, and I don't mind being totally sober at all of a sudden. I've had no counseling, it just happened, all of this, in the last few months. Pounds have been falling off of me with no explanation. I can fit back into pants that I should have thrown away 7 years ago. I haven't started working out. I haven't changed my diet. I'm not sick. I feel great, actually. Again, just over the past few months. I've always had adult acne, and it cleared up 90%. I haven't changed anything. I had a scar on my eyelid that I've had my whole life, and suddenly, I can't find it. It was big, it was thick, and it's gone. I have so much more energy. I'm off one of my antidepressants with no problem. All of these things have been over the same few months. J. Story 2, W. My experience starts when I heard about the effect. Back in 2012, I was struggling with everything and everyone I know, so I tried to take my own life. I survived, and ever since then, I've been living like in an alternative universe. Fast forward to now, I'm married. My mother was never okay with my sexuality. When I told her I would be eloping, she was completely happy. This struck me as weird due to her religious views. I'm also not religious myself, which she is now aware of and doesn't mind. I think that day in September 2012, when I took my life, I did die. I think maybe I was transported here. I feel like a different person, like I'm living in a totally different life. Another example, my grandma passed away in 2014. I didn't mourn or feel sad, but she and I had always been very close. I mention this now because somehow I have the feeling now that she's okay in some other reality, or still alive. May I also add that after my hospitalization, my liver was found to have absolutely no damage and was completely healthy. The nurse said that she was astonished because of the amount of pills I took, and the time span between making it to the hospital should have severely damaged my liver. Sincerely, W. Last year on 4/27/16, I came into work and was going to clock in, but for the life of me I couldn't remember my clock-in number, which is extra odd as I have to type it in 8 times per day and have been doing it for 2 years. I stood in front of that clock and started to sweat and feel odd. It was about 2 minutes before I realized that my clock-in number was the day's date, 4/27, and even as I was typing it, it still felt wrong. Part of me said, of course that's your number, but the other part felt confusion. I'm just now realizing that 4/27 of this year is when my cat Milo died and was also the day I found your channel. The feeling of experiencing a synchronicity and noticing an ME, that gut feeling something is off, is akin to a lightning bolt, lighting up your awareness of that which is in front of you. Pay attention. Don't cast anything aside as not applicable. The thing which helped me was respecting other people's rabbit holes. When someone shares a wild story outside of the bounds of my definition of reality, I respect that it was developed from a conscious being, no different than myself. Experience is the only true teacher. JC. Story 2, in B. This last winter, my husband and I were driving and there was a bridge with "It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood" engraved in concrete. I laughed and I said to my husband, "What stupid idiot did that?" I have 5 kids, believe me, I know the song. I was going through YouTube when I came across ME. Being the skeptic that I am, I looked everything up and found everything I could and thought that maybe companies just changed things. I finally brought this to my husband's attention, and at first he was like, "Wow, that is weird. I wonder how they did that." Now, if I say anything, he becomes suddenly irritated with me and says, like that really matters in our lives. Or worse, he just pretends not to even hear me. This is where it gets really weird. Last night we were watching TV, and he said he'd like to buy me a hat like that one that was on TV. I looked at him really stupidly and said, "I'd never wear a hat like that, ever," and then I laughed. He got this nasty look and got very nasty with me and said that he had brought me hats just like it, but in different colors. That's when I said I'd never ever had a hat like that, nor would I ever wear a hat like that. He then said he'd bought me over 100 hats, and that I used to wear them all the time. Now I was getting a bit freaked out. I said, okay, whatever, but I can tell you the only hats I've ever worn were warm winter hats, garden hats, and I once had a fishing hat, but that's it. And if I had 100 hats, wouldn't I know? Where are they? You know what he told me? He told me I should have myself evaluated because I had lost my mind. I don't have anybody else to talk to about this. Thanks for listening, MB. Story 3S. I've tried and tried to remember Obama running for president before 2012, and I just can't. For my husband and I, we remember him running for the first time against Hillary Clinton. We don't remember McCain, and up until he was elected, Bush was president, so for us, hearing that he served 2 terms, it was just a little troubling. I don't know if anybody else has these same memories, but if so, we haven't heard anything about it. S. Story 4 PM. I was born in South America, lived there for 20 years, and now based in Europe. In February of 2017, I visited Peru, and to my surprise, a taxi driver made a comment about the rainy winter. I asked, "Is it winter right now?" And he answered yes. I've been in Peru 8 times before, same city, same place, same time of year, and I know it was always summer then. I love coffee espresso, but in almost every bar in Cusco, they have filtered coffee, not espresso. So on Sunday morning, I decided to find a bar that serves espresso. Walking in the center, I saw a bar called Top Quality. The name was in English, something really unusual for a city where everything else is not. I decided to check it out and I asked if they served espresso, and they replied, of course. I sat at the terrace, a large concrete platform with a 1-meter tall glass wall around it. I was drinking a double espresso when an unusual young woman sat at the table next to me. She said that she had just arrived and wanted some tips on how to get around. She said she was from London. We talked for about 15 minutes, smoked a cigarette, and before leaving we took a few selfies. The next day I told 4 friends of mine that were traveling with me that I'd take them to a good coffee shop. But when we arrived at the location, the coffee shop was gone. At first they thought I simply confused the location, but I was sure it was right there, in that place. Then they thought I was joking, since according to the locals, there'd never been a coffee shop there. But all of them got really puzzled when I showed them the photos on my mobile phone, and you could see that it was the same location. The terrace, its glass walls, the tables and chairs, and me drinking an espresso in a parallel timeline. Thanks, P. Story 5 DS. I'm subscribed to many channels on the Effect and get notifications about new videos posted. I received one yesterday on Taryn P. Lupo's channel about ringing in the ears and how chiropractors can treat this. It was very informative, this video, especially for somebody who had ringing in their ears since the 90s. And this is why I remembered it so clearly. Remembered it, you say? Yes, remembered it. In past tense. Initially, I thought it was just a reposted video, so I contacted him, and when I asked the good doctor, he said he had been planning on doing the video for quite a while prior to yesterday, and that it was never a repost.
It turns out some other subscriber also conveyed the same, so now I'm curious to see if anybody else is sharing this new type of precognition. D.
Hi. I'm doing this video. I've pretty much been forced to do this video because I can't hold this in anymore about what's going on in my life. I've been going through this for, probably quite a few years now, where things have been just going wacko in my life, and I didn't know what was happening until just, the past 6 months. There's just constant changes in my life that I feel like if I don't talk about it, I'm just gonna, I have one family member that actually believes me. I know a lot of people don't have that. The thing that I'm dealing with here is I have seen my local cemetery changing. And a friend of mine who passed away, his tombstone is different, like every other week when I go over there. It's 1 week, he was a drummer. His tombstone used to have drumsticks on it. And, had like his nickname, and he was just, a guy I really liked, and I always remembered him. And I went over there with my mom one day, and the tombstone had totally changed. It was a dark brown, whereas before it was like a flat stone, and it had drumsticks on the stone, and it was like a gray color. Well, this next tombstone was just a brown color, no drumsticks, nothing. It was just plain. And the one that I just recently saw, I went today just to see if anything had changed, and yeah, it's different again. It's brown and gray now, but no drumsticks. And I'm not remembering wrong. I'm not confabulating. I'm not, I have a photographic memory, and I have an associate's degree in applied science. I'm not just some person out here spitting off stupidity that, hey, this has changed, and, without really knowing. My cemetery near my town is totally different. There's mausoleums at different places than where they used to be. One's missing, one's totally changed. My father is buried out there, and his has stayed the same so far. It hasn't changed at all. My grandfather's is the same, and my family members are the same. Everything else, even the trees, there were trees missing at one point along a line by a cornfield, and where there used to be trees, and then they all disappeared, and now today there's 3 trees there. So, it's just constant changing of the stones, the trees, the landscape. I guess what I'm trying to say is that anybody that's familiar with your cemetery that goes there a lot, a lot. You've got to go like every other week and check it, and just keep checking. You're going to start seeing things different. It will blow your mind. It's not a label. It's not, something that's, on a package or whatever. It's something that's actually changing in real time that you can keep track of. And there was one man out there that was buried, and my mom said, "Oh, hey, I just saw him last week." I'm like, "What?" "He's been dead since 1983. It says so on the stone." She's like, "Well, I just saw him at my class reunion, and I know it was him, and, I know he was a friend of mine. I want to know if, if I'm not alone in all of this, because sometimes I just feel like, you just feel like you're losing it." And you're not, because there's so many people out there that are going through similar.
Story 1, AG. I went for a hike and grabbed a bottle of water out of my freezer. When I got to the creek where I wanted to sit and soak up some sun, I grabbed the bottle and looked at it to see if it had fluoride in it, as I tried to stay away from that stuff. It was your regular Nestle water bottle, which my son bought since I don't like to support Nestle. It all looked like a normal bottle to me. I put it down in the sun to melt the ice inside, and about 15 minutes later, I grabbed it to take a sip. I almost had a heart attack when I looked at the label. Half the label was now a white writing label that they had put on there, for you to write your name on. I couldn't believe my eyes. Only 15 minutes prior to that, it did not have a white label on there. Whoa. AG. Story 2, M. Do you know anything about the flip-flop effect? A few days ago, beginning of May 2017, I read about the Apollo 13 Mandela effect.
that Houston, we have a problem changed to Houston, we've had a problem, I was pretty sure that it should have been we have. So I looked at the fragment and it clearly was we've had. I remember very well because I wanted to be sure about it. I was skeptical about the Mandela effect. I thought everyone just wasn't paying enough attention, and it was all based on misunderstandings. However, yesterday I looked at the footage again after, reading about the flip-flops. So I checked the footage again and it changed back to we have. I'm 100% sure because my memory is fresh and I was paying close attention when I checked out the original ME. We have versus we've had. M. Story 3, C. Recently, I was checking in at a social service building, and after using the facilities, I got in line to check in. Upon telling the receptionist all my information, I was told that I was already checked in. As this was impossible on all levels, I even asked my boyfriend if he had checked me in, and he said no. He didn't know my social security number, and that's how they reference you in their system. I've been aware of these situations, but have never had one happen to me. I have to say it didn't frighten me. It was very reassuring. I felt no fear or foreboding. It happened again yesterday. I was on Facebook reading posts and I came across a post from a distant friend. Somebody funny, so I watched her video and I was going to click the like button only to discover that I'd already liked it. Now I have spotty internet on my phone because I have to use Wi-Fi, but the video was posted about 15 minutes before I watched it. And there was no way that I had seen it before. Again, it's like I'm, following myself, trippy and amazing. I experienced numbers of synchronicities and various other ME phenomenon, especially the ascension symptoms like a racing heart that I've been to the doctor for, but nothing's wrong with me. I've gone twice already. Nervousness and depression too. There are other minor things and lots of Mandelas, but this is the first time that I had something like this personally occur. I must say, we are living in exciting times. C. Story 4, PM. I'd like to share something that's happening to me in the last 2 to 3 months. The thing is that I can't recognize most foods anymore. When I'm eating, I can tell if I like the taste or not, but I don't know what I'm eating. I've been married for 16 years. My wife is an artist, but cooking was never one of her skills. Sometimes even a fried egg was too much of a challenge for her. Well, one day, I came home for dinner, and she surprised me with a delicious and very elaborate meal. The strange thing is that since that day, she cooks like a pro, and she even mentioned that one day in the future, we could open a small restaurant. It's crazy, and although now I enjoy very much eating dinner at home, I still can't recognize the foods I'm eating. It feels as if I haven't tasted these dishes ever before. I hope that makes sense. My English is not good. PM. Story 5, TB. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and I spent a lot of time around Michigan and Ohio. I can say for certain that geography has changed. Boise Blanca Island, for one, never existed, neither did the Gagarin Bay or the lake next to Detroit, which is also in the wrong place. The lakes used to connect differently, and there was not so much distance to the Atlantic. It's as if the whole continent has gotten jolted to the left. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and position relative to Lake Michigan and Detroit is totally off. TB.
Story 1, J. So I listen a lot and subscribe to your channel. I wanted to send this to you first. I've noticed what I think to be a Mandela effect for me. I was going to watch a video on YouTube from Smashing Pumpkins, but it's The Smashing Pumpkins. Is this right? I looked on the album cover and some say The Smashing Pumpkins, but others just say Smashing Pumpkins. Which way do you remember it? I remember it only without the. If you look on Google, you'll see that some of them say one way and some say the other. Maybe it's in the process of changing or it's residual left. I'm not sure, but it's just weird. If I find other stuff, I'll let you know. J. Story 2, Anonymous. My son and I live in a neighborhood that is next to a cemetery. In this cemetery, I have 4 loved ones buried. My father, my dad, my maternal grandmother, Nanny, and paternal grandfather and grandmother, Grammy and Grampy. Okay, so my son and I were walking through there the other day, and he was asking questions about life and death. He's 5.5, so I was being fairly open with him. I explained that I had family buried in the cemetery, and he wanted to visit them and see the graves. I agreed that we would look on the way back. Unfortunately, my family is pretty poor, so my dad and Nanny don't have headstones, but Grammy and Grampy have a mutual plot with a mutual stone. I clearly remember what the stone was. I have a vague idea of where Nanny's is buried, about 4 down from the back, the very back, and Grammy and Grampy are in the same section, but a few rows up closer to the path. Dad is in another section. My son and I searched for Grammy and Grampy. I can't find them, and I'm getting confused and upset and almost panicky, and then I notice a stone that looks just like theirs. The only problem is it's in the wrong place, like really wrong. It's in the very back corner. The last time I went to visit them was about 5 years ago, a few months after Grampy passed. The stone was not in a back corner. It was about 6 rows up from that and about 7 stones in from the path. I haven't asked family if they have had a stone moved for any reason. I feel like they would think I was crazy if I did ask. Now I'm really curious to find out if Nanny and Dad are still where I remember them. Anyway, I hope this makes sense. I still get strange feelings when I think about it, like anxiety and sadness. This is one of the strangest things that I have ever experienced. I will answer any follow-up questions that you might have. Anonymous. Story 3, MG. I've been researching the quantum effect for some years now and have found your series on personal stories of sufferers. I use the word sufferers because that's how I describe myself. Incredibly fascinating and helpful. I've been working towards the courage to reach out to your group, but I just watched a video saying that it was disbanded. Therefore, I might beg that you use my story in one of your videos, or not. I'm sure you get a lot of these and it's hard to tell who's being serious, but please believe that I believe. I feel like my head is being held underwater as real life rushes past me above. I can only regard it, and my participation is trance-like. It feels like I don't belong here. I frequently forget that I have a sister. It always surprises me when I remember her existence, and sometimes it takes a minute to remember her name. It's like I have 2 memories conflicting. She's 10 years younger. We lived together for decades. I always watched her when she was little, but her existence always comes as a bit of a jolt for some reason. My mother thinks that I must hate my sister because I never contact her. It's not the case. I just forget about her. My husband is the only person with whom I share my thoughts on the effect. The majority he can debunk, but there are a few things that really get him at base level. For years before we had ever heard of the effect, he's a movie buff, one who can't watch a film or TV show without looking at every actor, writer, and producer on IMDb. Points out that when actors we knew were deceased, they suddenly resurfaced. Mind you that these are people for whom he had read and seen obituaries, news articles, and tributes. Then we can't find a shred of evidence of those things existing at all, and they've never left the limelight seemingly at all. Well, we just used to call it one of those. We agree on displaced geography and changes in human anatomy, specifically the placement of the heart, but this is nothing compared to a change in my own history, which my husband is eerily cavalier about. My father died on September 23rd at 4:25 p.m. in 2006. I was present when he died, and I was the one to point out that he was no longer breathing. We had been getting ready to transfer him to home hospice care, but he went hours before we could even move him. What has always brought me comfort when I felt grief over the years is the fact that everyone in the room, when he went, was with him, family, friends, and I have a highly distinct memory of it. We used to say to each other he waited until we were all there. In 2016 was the 10-year anniversary of his death, and I made some phone calls and emails to people. Mostly everyone remembered him having died on the 24th in the middle of the night with only his girlfriend and a nurse present. 2 people even remembered a different hospital. And my aunt says that hospice never delivered equipment to her house that she had to send back, an event that really set off the grief that she had been holding back when I remember it. Now it never happened. This nuance sent me into a depression that I've not been able to escape from, a sort of existential break. I used to get together with these people a few times a year and reminisce about him. We would all have dinner and tell stories. We would always say he waited until we were all there. Now they aren't close to me at all. MG. Story 4KF. I had first realized something was wrong maybe a year ago, but attributed it to a false memory, although I could have sworn that it wasn't. Then a week ago, I saw the golden mask of King Tut and saw that it had changed. I've spent most of my life reading up on ancient Egyptian history. It shook me up really bad. I got brave and I posted about it on Facebook, and everyone told me that I was wrong. I'm not wrong, and it hurts, and it's surreal that nobody believes me. It was my dad that instilled my love of Egypt for me, so that blew my mind. Anyway, I'm feeling pretty alone in all this, and I'd love to be part of a group with more like-minded people, so thankfully I stumbled across your channel. Thanks, KF. Story 5, TG. I'm not what one would call a believer in the Mandela effect, but I am an experiencer of the Mandela effect. No one can tell me what I know to be true. Now for my personal story. We live down the street from a Safeway, which has upscale housing development across the street. The development is surrounded by a sidewalk and an iron railing fence to protect it from the street. Driving home from TJ Maxx one afternoon, passing this block, I noticed a car had veered off the road, knocking over a fire hydrant and crashing into an iron fence, bending it. There was also a chip gashed out of the tiny tree next to it. I commented to myself that must have happened a while ago because the street and sidewalk are dry, or maybe it was just a fake hydrant, which is used to keep other people from parking there. I don't know, because I was talking to myself. Later that evening, after dinner, my husband commented that we needed more milk for breakfast and that he was going to run down to Safeway. Did we need anything else? I said no, and off he drove. When he returned about 30 minutes later, he said to me, I just saw an accident across the street from Safeway. A car careened into a hydrant and knocked it over, and it hit a tree and rammed into the iron railing. I was confused, to say the least. I said, what? You mean you just saw that happen, or did you see it yesterday and you just thought of telling me now? He said, no, I just saw it. It happened on my way to Safeway in the parking lot. By the time I got out of Safeway, the police were there and a tow truck was already hauling the car away. I sat in shock, but I didn't say anything. My mind was too confused as to how to process what I just heard. I let it go, so to speak. The following day in the car, he pointed out the spot where the accident he saw had occurred, and it was my spot where I saw it the day before. Just to be sure, I asked again, so you saw this last night? Yes, he replied. Now I can't let it go. Best regards, TG. Story 6, Jynx. This 4th of July, I had another experience that floored me personally, that unless you were there doesn't hold merit for most people at all. We purchased a firework called Pooping Puppy. I know, we're cool. I decided to tape this firework to use in a future video because it was so goofy. We lit the firework and I recorded and watched the entire firework through the screen of my iPhone. I recorded the entire thing and even made note to get good framing. I was really happy with the video. However, when I went to watch what I had recorded, this is what the camera had picked up. Bear in mind, I watched the entire firework through the screen as I recorded. I have no idea how the footage recorded on this video could have possibly been recorded. I was not moving when I shot this video. I had another experience Wednesday night that baffled me. On Clyde Lewis's show Ground Zero, they had the Crystal Skull Shanaran on as it was traveling in Portland July 6th through the 8th. They hooked it to something called the Black Cube, a microwave frequency detector, think scrying, to access information and answers from the info recorded in the Crystal Skull. I waited online for 40 minutes to ask the skull if the quantum effect is a natural phenomenon that's being manipulated. Right before I go on live, the producer comes on and tells me they're not able to talk about the Mandela effect at all, or ask any questions about it. He says I can ask about anything else, and I tell them no thanks and hang up. It was an incredibly sketchy reaction, and it left me with more questions about the show's intent that night than anything else. WTF. Story 1, AG. I drive past a Rona hardware store every day when I go to work. It always makes me think of my girlfriend Rona in Florida, who thinks it's so cool that we have a hardware store in Canada named after her. I told her about this back in 2014 when I took a photo of it and sent it to her. The logo was always regular letters, RONA. Well, a few weeks ago, I drove past the store on my way to work, and I almost fainted. The logo had changed. The letter A at the end is now an upside-down V. What? I emailed my girlfriend Rona and I asked her how she remembered it. She said it was always regular letters. Phew, I wasn't going crazy.
But then I went through the old photos in my BlackBerry phone to find the old photo of the Rona store I took in 2014. I was so nervous and hoping to find some so-called Mandela effect residue to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. Well, I almost fell off the couch when I found the old photo, and it too had changed to the new way with the new letter, with that last letter A now being a funky upside down V. How does that work? I remember clearly the way it looked the old way, with just regular letters. And the reason I do is because it always made me think of my girlfriend when I drove past it to go to work. I always sent her a silent blessing. AG, Story 2, JK. I have been experiencing shifts for many years. I have told people many times that I did not feel like I belong here and I just wanted to go home. They would ask me where home was, but I never had a clue. I always felt like I could feel changes or some kind of shifts happening, like some kind of wave came over me and my whole body would kind of vibrate. I would try to tell people about it around me, but they laughed it off like it was a joke or it was silly. So eventually, I just turned it into a joke, and I talked about time shifts happening. It's been so good knowing that I'm not the only one who experienced these things. I've only just discovered the ME title over a month ago, and once I went through a few videos about it, I contacted my best friend exclaiming, "I'm not crazy after all." At first, he was really receptive of it and agreed that a lot of things I was pointing out made sense. About a week later, I felt as if I'd shifted again, and when I tried to talk to him about it, he became very skeptical and started throwing out everything he could to debunk what I was saying. Total opposite of how he reacted a week earlier. We also work at the same job and change the setup of the merchandise on our shelves throughout the store. There's an older lady that works with us, and one night about 2 weeks ago, I was helping her with her shelves. I had looked at the 3 sheets of plans and had the shelves lined up and ready for her. When it came time, my friend went to help her and was talking about the plans that were on the sheet, but they weren't the plans I remembered. We argued for about 10 minutes on it, and he shoved the paper at me. It had changed, within only 20 minutes of me planning to help her. Then about a week ago, we were resetting the makeup aisle. I was being funny and calling out the silly names on the lipsticks. One of them had his girlfriend's name on it, his ex, I pointed out to him. Later, when we were leaving, he grabbed a Coke randomly, like he always does every morning, and I noticed the exact same name there. These synchronicities caused a surge in my mind. I told him he needed to watch out because she was probably going to pop up and he needed to avoid her. I thought maybe in a week or a month she would randomly message him. Within 3 hours after we left, he messaged me freaking out about how his ex had just sent him a message. He's not as skeptical anymore. JK. Story 3 TP. Hi, I wanted to share this with you because what you post on YouTube has quality and merit. I will no longer refer to the changes as anything other than the quantum effect. Back in 1996, I found out that Nelson Mandela was still alive, and it floored me. I clearly remember his funeral. It was a major international event that sparked massive positive change. I was a huge follower of his and had studied Africa most of my life. After his death, his wife Winnie overwhelmingly won an election and brought peace to much of the continent. It was a terrible feeling when I discovered that this was somehow not the case and it had never happened. I was sad, but that beautiful man was alive and that just seemed crazy. I began to tell people about this, some who also remembered, and when I did, I referred to it as the Nelson Mandela effect. When the internet became accessible, I posted about this on message boards and took a lot of flack for being a nutcase. A certain semi-celebrity in the paranormal groups took my story to a more famous person and then claimed the term as her own. My overall goal was to raise awareness about the big changes of a highly unnatural nature that were taking place, not to become famous so that the person could have the claim, but fact of the matter is these changes were noticed starting in the mid-90s and not past 2000. I was mad because the life I was leading was gone. Wonderful things in the world for everyone were gone. Some people said that I was confused by a dream I'd had, but for a long time I had paperwork to prove certain things, such as direct contact with the Leakey Foundation, where I'd been assigned as an assistant to Cynthia Moss to continue the work of Diana Fossey with mountain gorillas. Miss Moss now is famous for her research of African elephants, having never worked with primate studies. A book my mother had given me as a birthday present on mountain gorillas was a prized treasure because she'd never bought me a gift that had anything to do with my real interests, and that book is now about elephants. So anyway, I struggled with the WTF aspect of these changes alone for years. It's really nice to finally see your comforting videos and know that I'm not alone. So blessings to you, TP. Story 4, M. One of the Mandela effects I started noticing years ago was the light I remembered of the world when I grew up in the 70s and 80s as a kid. I can look out my grandmother's window, down at my other grandmother's house, down the road, and I looked out the window so many times when I was a kid. Back 10 to 12 years ago, I kept telling my brother and sister that the light was different. I remember the colors of everything looking different when I was a kid. The world was shaded different. It was more yellow. It was more brilliant, but tinted differently. My brother thought I was nuts. He kept saying it was because I watched old TV shows and the colors were different. And then he'd say, well, it was because we used to use LED monitors and the colors are different, and now I can see different ranges of colors and my eyesight has changed. No, that's not it. Then I began to take note that the sun was white, not yellow. It was always yellow, and now it's not. It's as white as can be. I asked my brother, did he remember the sun ever being yellow? And he said no. I've asked so many people if they remember the sun being yellow, and they all look at me like I'm nuts. When I drew pictures as a child, I drew the sun and it was always yellow, but in our sky, it is white and hot and intense. It's 90 degrees here in WV in May. Our town is called the nation's air-conditioned city because it never hits 90. When we have a 90-degree day in the summer, the city gives out free lemonade the next day. It's a really rare thing, but not anymore. They had to stop a few years ago. It's now every summer. So a big one for me that I remember is the sun being yellow. The world has a different tint. It's white now. The world looks different. Anybody else have this experience? Thanks for all you do. M. Story 5, D. I have bunches of stories, but this one is good for starters. I normally only visited my hometown through one friend, and when I decided to visit and explore on my own, I found out that many of my friends' houses were inhabited by people weirdly similar, but not them, and claimed that they had been there for years. Then I went over to this girl's house that I used to date, and the whole house was missing, and some other house, even older, was in its place. My sister and her were good friends, and when I called to tell her about it, she didn't even remember her. A place I used to get reflexology at, I drove by every day, was gone, and a 100-year-old church was there instead. This was in early 2000. D. Story 1, AG. I have a tattoo on my right ankle, on the side of my leg, which has been there since 2005. A few weeks ago, when I was in the shower, I looked down at my feet and I noticed that the tattoo had now officially moved about an inch towards the front of my leg. I was never able to see it, just looking straight down. It's no longer on the side of my leg. It's now halfway to the front of my leg. That really shook my world. Also, the shape of my head has changed. It is now more flat and square on both sides. My eye color is changing back and forth all the time too, from green to blue, back to green again. AG. Story 2, MB. I would like to start off by saying I really like your videos and the way you present them. I can tell that you do your research. Your background in media helps a lot, but you give the facts as you see them and you let the viewers decide for themselves. They have been one of the best ones out there I have seen so far, and trust me, I've looked at numerous videos in the last few weeks since I became aware of the Mandela effect. My partner thinks that I'm going crazy or having a nervous breakdown because I'm watching all of this stuff on YouTube lately, and this is going to sound crazy, but for the last few years, strange things have been happening mostly around me, and I've just put it off as coincidence or deja vu. Not to mention medical problems. In January 2016, I was having a lot of pain in my groin and hip area, primarily on my left side, and some days I couldn't even walk. Finally, in March 2016, I had an MRI which revealed stress fractures in both my hips and my sacrum. I'm not sure if I spelled that one right. Anyways, long story short, now I've been diagnosed as having fibromyalgia, which is what doctors diagnose you of having when they don't really know what's wrong with you. Also, in the last few months, I've been having severe pain in my shoulder area and numerous other health issues. So my point to this email today is that the Mandela effect and the skeletal changes to our body are supposed to have changed. And I'm not sure about this, or I'm saying that that's what's happened to me, but starting to go, it all sounds crazy, and even more so now that I've written it into words. And if the Mandela effect is true, there's really not much we can do about it.
Anyways, I've started looking into alternative medicine. Check out Dolores Cannon or Dr. Eric Pearl. Just a few interesting ideas on the whole thing. Dolores Cannon, I think, explains it best, and I'm starting to believe her outlook on it all. Things are changing everywhere and in everything. People are evolving, and we are being prepared and brought up to speed on the new world that I think is already happening. These subtle changes in movies and candy bars have always really been there, but we've never really noticed until everybody started sharing their experiences. I like to think of it as an awakening and not really a conspiracy. Don't get me wrong, I think that there are worse conspiracies like chemtrails and other things that I'm just learning about. I just wanted to share this with you. P.S. Boycotting YouTube, you go girl. I know you might think that I am some kind of crazy, and maybe I am a little, my friends say a good crazy, but I'm a normal country-at-heart woman with 2 grown sons from London, Ontario, Canada. I hope you do reply, but if you don't, that's okay too. I hope you have a great life. Thanks for reading. M. Story 3, JN. Hey, you did my personal story months ago. I'm writing you this because I need to talk to you and see if all of this makes sense to you or your group. You really cared and you made my story come to life, and I thank you again, but things have gotten worse for me. Where to start? After you aired my story, I stayed away from the Mandela effect. I stopped watching you and Dr. Lupo and even Moneybag 73. I wanted to put things into the past and start a new life. With my family gone and with no answers why this all happened with me, I wanted freshness, if that makes sense. With that said, new aspects of the Mandela effect have been plaguing me and I need to get this out. First, the ear ringing has ramped up, and at times I can make out voices and music. It's like hearing an old transmission to an old TV program on VHS. I'll hear it, but I can't make it out at times. I started to go biking more, and I would ride to this one spot, an empty lot that I could see the sunset between these 2 beautiful trees. I would stop and actually remember the good days with my brother and my family before they were gone. A week ago, I went to see the sunset in this empty lot. A house sits there now with an old tire swing and mailbox. The trees are still there, but it's all changed. So I asked the owner about his house, and he told me it's been there for at least 40 years. It just magically appeared out of nowhere. I swear to God it was not there a week ago. I really don't know what to say, and there's so much more. Now it gets really scary. Along with the changes to the world around me, I'm changing. Please hear me out. All my life I was a right-handed person, and now I'm using both like it's second nature to me. Even more, my left hand than my right. I have a birthmark that I never had before. My friends are changing as well. I've known them for years and aspects of their lives are changing, and it's drastic too. One friend who never had children now has a 12-year-old son, who claims I met and had lunch with him, and I have no recollection of him. My dreams are more vivid and they feel like I'm peering into some other existence. Maybe one I should be in? I don't know. I look into the mirror and I don't see me anymore. I know we all age, but it feels so wrong. Other things that are there are numerical anomalies. That's what I call them. Saying certain numbers, waking up at certain times. But now it's gotten weirder. Things always come out right, meaning money amounts and bank amounts, budgets, and even trips to the store all coming out the same amounts or being equal. Plus, time is out of whack, like it's speeding up and going by way too fast. I want to end this by saying I feel like I'm in the middle of a convergence between 2 worlds. Like caught in the middle of them. Does that make sense? Could it be that I hold on to the memories of my deceased family so tight that the trauma of it is putting me there? My mom would tell me stories about her dad and how he would take her to the Statue of Liberty on Ellis Island, and that they would go to the torch and look out over the water and she would close her eyes and wish. I know because every time we saw the statue on television, she'd always bring it up. Well, now it's changed. It's on Liberty Island, and you could never go to the top. An example of a change. Or that it is a body snatcher type of thing. Instead of them replacing our bodies, they're doing it from the inside instead, like starting with our minds. Thank you so much for hearing me out and being who you are. I hope it helps your research and maybe brings new light onto the subject. God bless, and you have all my honesty, love, and respect. Jynx Cat J. Story 4 SB. Someone said the head now sits differently on the spine. I heal the head, neck structures, all the time. It seems like less to correct. Personally, I notice much less pain in the knees, back, etc. I think maybe my skull is smaller, but too much hair for me to know for sure. The last change months ago made my frontal lobes smaller. That was about the time my technique seemed less effective too. SB. Story 5 DL. I work as a pediatric home care nurse. I was looking for more hours, and the nursing agency that I work for sent me to visit a mom who was looking for a day nurse to take care of her disabled child. It's called a meet and greet, to see if I want to take on the case and to see if the mom likes me. I had considered taking this case a year or so ago, so I was meeting the mom and daughter again. I remember the little girl being about 8 years old with very yellow blonde hair. So I went to the house located near where I live, and the mom greeted me and we sat down in the dining room. The mom called her daughter down from upstairs. As I turned my head, the girl appeared coming down the steps and towards us. I was taken aback. She looked now to be about 13 to 14 years old, much taller, and her yellow blonde hair was now a dirty blonde. I focused on talking to the mom and I kept looking at the daughter. I drove home really puzzled. The next day, I saw a fellow nurse who cares for this child currently, 1 day a week, and I remarked how tall she'd gotten. This nurse just looked at me with no comment. 2 days later, I was driving by the child's house and looked over there, and there was the 8 or 9-year-old child with the yellow blonde hair that I remembered playing with her dad in the backyard. What the hell? Where did I go? I'm glad I came back to my own reality, but DL. Although our surroundings may change, our memories may change, and our bodies may change, our essence remains the same. We are beings of light and love. We are a part of something much larger than ourselves, and we are never truly alone.